My favorite plant to grow in my yard is the fruit tree, because you plant it once and you get fruit for decades. If you have ever been curious on the best ways to be successful in growing fruit trees, today is your lucky day. Why? Because my team and I have compiled our best interviews and videos in one place to assist you in growing your own toe-tingling peaches and awesome apples right out your front or back door. Plus, as an added bonus, we've included an in-depth guide to successfully growing fruit trees in your yard. To get access to this information, it's free by the way, just go to urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444. That's urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the grow your own food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Robbie Shell to talk about her experience with honeybees and colony collapse disorder. Robbie was a business journalist and co-author of a book on leadership. She turned her attention to honeybees when her brother, a beekeeper, brought her a few jars of honey harvested from his backyard hives. Inspired by the teamwork and efficiency displayed by these tiny pollinators, she left her job as a business editor and writer and wrote Bees on a Roof. This is a middle grade environmental fiction novel that tells the story of 4 7th graders competing in a science competition, but also educates young readers, and us olders too, about the importance of honeybees to our environment and the dangers they face from the still mysterious colony collapse disorder. Robbie, who graduated from Princeton University with a degree in history, grew up in Connecticut and lived in Charlottesville, Boston, New York City, Washington, D.C. She and her husband now live in Philadelphia, where they raise their 2 sons. She can claim she has never been stung by a honeybee. How cool is that? Wasps, however, are a different story. Welcome to the show today, Robbie.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Good. Me too.
So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Sure. So you mentioned that I got hooked on all this when my brother gave me the jar of honey. Mm-hmm. What I didn't anticipate was how incredibly amazing these honeybees are. They're very sophisticated navigation systems, their communication systems, food production systems. These are probably more efficient than any of the systems that humans have. But I have to say what really hooked me on the topic was when I saw a video of honeybees marching out of a shoebox-sized package that had been sent through the mail to a beekeeper here in Pennsylvania. But what got me is they were marching single file, no pushing, no shoving, no one trying to get ahead of each other. They were just trying to get out of the box, set up their new home, take care of the queen. So, you know, we live in this society where there's so many prima donnas, whether it's in entertainment or sports or financial services. And here is this community where everyone knows what they're supposed to do. They're totally dedicated to the good of the hive. Mm-hmm. And plus, it's a matriarchal society where females rule. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, there you go.
So I thought, wow, I'm gonna really look into researching these. And then I guess the final nail in the coffin, in a way, was I wrote an essay for the Wall Street Journal on how much I love honeybees. And I said in that essay that I might write a book about them.
Oh my gosh!
And then when you say that, you know, of course, everyone then says, "So where's the book?"
Yeah, exactly.
And I finally got to it through a long route. I started out thinking about writing an adult nonfiction book on bees, and then realized there are thousands of those. And I eventually came around to writing this fiction story for middle grade kids.
Yeah, I actually really love learning via fiction writing. It's a really effective way to learn, is it not?
Well, it is. And in fact, the publisher of the book, it's a Boston-based publisher called Tumblehome Learning, and their philosophy is that if you don't catch kids by 7th grade and hook them on the STEM disciplines, that by then you've lost them. So that's why they specialize in what's called environmental fiction. They want they want kids to be entertained in a way by a good story, but they want them to be informed and excited by something, that's non-fictional and that affects the environment that they're going to be inheriting.
Yeah. So can you explain environmental fiction?
Well, so it's just the combination of factual information about some aspect of the environment. In my case, it was honeybees. It can be about polluted water. It can be about toxic air. It can be about climate change. So anything that affects all of us and our ecology, but written about in sort of encased in a fictional cocoon almost, so that kids, when they're reading about it, they almost don't realize they're getting taught a lot, because hopefully they're very interested in the story. And so my challenge, I knew how to research bees, and I knew what was interesting and important. My challenge was trying to get into the mind of seventh graders, which is extremely difficult. I'm not sure I ever did get into the minds of my kids when they were in middle school. It's a tough time. But getting into their minds, getting dialogue, and that kind of thing. So, it's kind of a combination of two approaches to writing.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us about your book. It's called Bees on a Roof.
Bees on the Roof. So it's about 4 seventh graders who live in Manhattan, and they go to a very prestigious private school that emphasizes science. And for their science project, which is very important to these kids, they choose to study honeybees and colony collapse disorder, because the project is supposed to be something that's relevant. And given the fact that millions of bees are dying because of this CCD, colony collapse disorder, their project was approved, and they decide to put beehives on the roof of a hotel where one of the kids' father is a pastry chef. And for various reasons that probably don't have time to go into, it's extremely important that they win first place.
Oh, right.
So the book takes us through a group of bullies that tries to actually, physically move them out of the competition. There's a romance blooming. There's the danger that the boy's father, who's the pastry chef, will lose his job. There's a kind of reclusive science teacher and a mystery about her. And woven all throughout that is the kids' discovery of honeybees and what it takes to care for them, and how incredibly important they are to our environment. So it's about 220 pages. It's not a hard read, but I think it's an intriguing one. So that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I suspect that there's probably a good amount of information in the book that us adult readers might want to read it as well.
Well, there's a lot of information about what colony collapse is and the different theories of what's causing it, such as the use of too many insecticides, climate change, these horrible pests and parasites that attack hives, and the fact that there are more and more acres of land being given over to mono-agriculture, which takes away all the wildflowers that honeybees feed on. So there's a lot of very, not age-specific, which means adult too, information on colony collapse disorder, but also on how to take care of honeybees and how amazing they are. And I go into their anatomy and into the ways they are able to tell other bees where the nectar is.
Oh, right.
And, what the hives look like and how you get the honey, how you sort of rob the hives of the honey when it's time to harvest it, and all that. So the kids are taken through, ordering the hives all the way through to collecting the honey and giving it to the pastry chef to use in his baking.
How cool is that?
Well, thank you.
I love in our culture when we can make the full circle around, basically they've got honeybees on the roof, they're harvesting it, and it's being made into pastries downstairs. So, there's that full circle of our food system represented there, which is
exactly right. And the book also does try to make the topic extremely interesting to the kids. So at one point, one of the boys takes his 3 teammates to a grocery store, and they go up and down the aisles, and he points to everything that bees pollinate. So
oh my gosh!
If you consider that of 100 major crops in this country, about 70 are pollinated by honeybees. That's a huge impact on our food system.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
And those crops include, I tell in the book, not just apples and blueberries and peaches and avocados and broccoli and onions, but watermelon. You're not going to have watermelon seed spitting contests if we don't have watermelon.
Right.
We're not going to be able to carve pumpkins at Halloween if we don't have pumpkins. Almond growers, or all the almond groves in California, where there are 800,000 acres of these almond groves, they're all pollinated by honeybees.
Yeah.
And the honeybees are actually carted there from other places
Parts of
in
the
country.
Yeah.
Because California doesn't have enough honeybees to pollinate all that. So
Right.
it's a very interlocking story.
So a couple of questions for you here. So this kind of speaks to the role that honeybees play in our daily life.
Right.
They're pollinators of 70% of what we eat.
Yep, exactly. Well, another way to look at this is that 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat relies on bees for pollination.
Wow.
In terms of the agricultural industry, pollination adds about $15 billion to a crop's value each year.
Wow.
That could be lost.
Yeah.
And globally, the latest global assessment of the threats to pollinators says that plants that depend on pollination make up 35% of global crop production, not to mention all the jobs that are created by the agricultural system.
Wow.
So it has these little insects. I mean, they're 3/4 of an inch long. They're tiny, and they have a huge, huge impact on our environment, our ecology, our food system.
Yeah. So talk about colony collapse disorder and what it is as best as you can.
Okay, so colony collapse disorder, it refers to the sudden loss of a hive's worker bees, which means that the worker bees are the female bees that go out to forage for the nectar and pollen and brings both back to the hive.
Uh-huh.
All of a sudden they disappear. They don't return to the hive. So the queen and the brood, another word for the young, remain in the hive along with the honey and pollen reserves, but the hives, without the worker bees there, they can't sustain themselves, so they die, they collapse, and that's why it's called colony collapse disorder. So right now, bees are dying at some of the highest rates ever recorded. 42% of U.S. bee colonies collapsed last year.
Wow.
The average is about 31%. And not only that, but the loss rates during the summer exceeded those of the winter, which is the opposite of what should be, because bees are thought to be healthier and more robust exactly during the summer.
Right.
So that's a pretty dramatic number.
Oh yeah.
Now there's a lot of theories about what causes colony collapse disorder, and probably the most controversial is the use of insecticides, mainly a group of them called neonicotinoids, which is for good reason called neonics for short. And they've been around since the 1990s, and they're made by big companies like Bayer and Monsanto and Syngenta, and they're basically sprayed on corn, wheat, soy, cotton seeds. They're sprayed right into the seeds of the flowers, and it's thought that they then travel up through the plant into the bees' bodies as they're gathering the nectar,
right.
And that in some way they affect the bees' nervous systems and their homing instinct, so they can't find their way home.
Oh.
That's why the beehives collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of the organic beekeepers, a lot of commercial beekeepers think that these insecticides are really, really damaging. Now, the companies that make these insecticides say, no, wait a minute, we're not the main culprits. The main culprits are the varroa mites. It's a parasite that sucks the blood out of honeybees. Another parasite are the small hive beetles that lay hundreds of eggs that basically crowd out the bee eggs.
Uh-huh.
Then there are viruses, there are fungi, and other stuff. So that's a big problem. And then there's climate change I mentioned.
Yeah.
With changes in the landscape and in the plants that are no longer being growing as fruitfully.
Yeah.
Bees, they haven't quite adapted to this new environment that we have with all this climate change. So that's a problem. So in other words, there are just a lot of sort of contributors to this problem. And I should say it's not just bees who are pollinators. Birds are, butterflies moths, wasps,
Ants?
bats, and pardon?
Ants?
I'm not sure that ants are pollinators.
I've seen them
I haven't
pollinating.
heard that.
Yeah, well.
Okay, then ants, and then humans. We're pollinators when we brush up against flowers and carry pollen around. So, and just getting back to the pesticides for a minute, I mean, some commercial beekeepers themselves use pesticides in their hives to control against the varroa mites. So I remember reading an article in the New York Times recently that said a typical honeybee colony contains residue from 120 pesticides. And so no single one alone is all that bad, but together they're this toxic soup is the phrase that's used.
Yeah, exactly.
So colony collapse disorder, it's not going away. No one really has a solution to it. It's just, there have been some, 2 European countries, I think, have banned this particular class of insecticides, and the EPA, I think, has actually temporarily banned their use in the U.S.
Interesting.
So there is a lot of activity, and of course, a lot of groups like the Natural Resource Defense Council and et cetera are lobbying very hard to get these insecticides banned, at least until they know more about how just how dangerous they are, or not dangerous. I mean, the verdict is probably still out, but there seems to be a lot of evidence that pesticides are not good for bees.
Well, and I've found over and over again in my garden for the past 40 years that when things are, number one, out of balance, you get blooms of pests. So if in the hive, if things are out of balance, the mites and other bugs can have more of a tendency to take hold.
Sure. As long as as soon as a hive is weakened by any of these factors, exactly, the bees fall. Either they fall to the pests, or they get viruses, or they just basically are attacked by whatever is around them, including wasps. Yeah. So
plus having environmental toxins. I mean, we see this in our bodies. If you get environmental toxins in your body, you're more susceptible to other pests, diseases and so on and so on. So I suspect that plays a role in it as well.
It does. You're right.
So, common misconceptions about beekeeping. Are there some?
About beekeeping or about bees? So I'll start with beekeeping.
Okay.
That's the word you use. So first of all, it's not if you decide to buy bees and set up beehives, it's not like you're getting some goldfish. It's not an easy, it's not a really easy. You don't have to spend any time, effortless, a riskless proposition. Beekeeping it takes a lot of commitment. It can take a lot of time. And I'm not a beekeeper myself, but I've been involved with my brother's hives in his backyard, and he has 6 hives, and 3 of them this year were destroyed by hive beetles. So, despite his best efforts, he only has 3 hives this year that are producing honey. There are huge numbers of bee associations that offer classes and clinics and all kinds of information sessions, because it's just a complicated but rewarding process to be a beekeeper. So once you decide to do it, you have to be committed. You have to make sure that the bees have water. You have to make sure that they have enough sugar in the or pollen patties, their protein patties during the winter months. You have to keep them away from predators like wasps or bears or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So, you don't just set them up in your backyard and forget about them. Plus, if you're in a neighborhood, you have to make sure first that you're obeying any legal rules about them, and that they don't go and bother your neighbors. The biggest misconception I think about bees is that when you're stung, people assume that it's the honeybee, and in fact it's almost always not, because honeybees are not aggressive. They will only sting you if you step on them or get in their flight path or somehow disturb them. They don't sting you because they die after they sting you.
Right.
So I think they're in their heart of hearts they don't really want to get involved with humans.
Right.
So if you're stung, it's probably by a yellow jacket or a hornet, which are much more aggressive. And yellow. I have been stung by a yellow jacket, and that's really painful.
Oh yes,
So,
it is. Yeah, James is emphatically shaking his head over here, saying, "Yeah."
yes, yeah. And I remember the first time I went to a commercial apiary out in Lancaster County here. I showed up, and the beekeeper said, "Let's go back and look at my hives." There were about 250 hives in his field. And I said, well, where's the protective outfit, the veiled hat and the coat and everything and gloves? And he said, no, we don't need them. And I said, what? We're going to. And he said, no, just walk slowly. Keep talking. We'll see where they're flying to. We won't get in their way. And so we walked out there, and there were literally hundreds of bees swirling around me. And I knew there were some in my hair. I knew I could see them on my sweater.
Oh my gosh!
And I just sat there, and I said, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to run. I'm just going to keep talking. And sure enough, they didn't sting me.
Yeah. You still haven't been stung.
I haven't been stung by a honeybee, and I've been around them a lot. I also visited, when I wrote the Wall Street Journal story, one of the comments came from the beekeeper at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home outside of Charlottesville.
Oh, yes.
And since I go to Virginia every summer, he said, come visit me.
Ooh.
So I went and visited Monticello several times.
Nice.
And he took me around all the hives that he manages there. And he doesn't wear the clothing, although he said that there are times when he does something wrong, or the bees are in this very feisty mood where he has gotten stung sometimes 10 or 12 times in one outing. But it doesn't really bother him that much. I think you build up a susceptibility.
Yeah.
But in any case, beekeepers know how to handle the bees.
Yeah.
And they typically don't get stung.
Be a bee when you're hanging out with the bees, and you won't get stung.
Right.
I just made that up.
Well, it could be a haiku almost. There's one exception. You've probably heard of African bees.
Oh, yes, the Africanized bees.
Killer bees.
Yep.
And they are extremely aggressive. They were brought here to Brazil in the 1950s to mate with the calmer Italian bees, because African bees produce more honey, and they thought if you could mate the two, you get calm bees that produce a lot of honey. But that's not what happened.
Yeah.
The African bees, first of all, they got away from the quarantined area, and they made their way up into Florida and the southern United States.
Yeah.
And they are extremely aggressive, and if you get anywhere near them and look at them the wrong way, they will come after you for a quarter of a mile. There have been people killed by swarms of African honeybees, but it's very rare, and I don't want to scare anyone.
Well, but it's something to take note of.
It is.
Yeah, something to take note of. So how can we go about protecting the honeybees? What can we do?
Well, one thing you can do, if you're kids, somebody can talk about kids, since that's who the book is aimed at. So kids, this is a kind of a small impact, but it's something they can get started with, is they can start a school project or their own project that involves planting a garden with honeybee-friendly plants, trees.
Yeah.
So, for instance, sunflowers, goldenrod, and dahlias are honeybee-friendly flowers. You can plant herbs like thyme, sage, or mint. I'm not sure you could plant. Kids might be in a position to plant trees, but maple, apple, and cherry trees are friendly. And then their weeds, dandelions, and clover, are very friendly. They provide a lot of good nutrition for the honeybees.
Mm-hmm.
You can be an entrepreneur. I mean, there's a rise of entrepreneurship among kids, and they're getting younger and younger. There's been a lot of stories about, well, I clipped a story about an 11-year-old girl from Texas who sold a product, her own homemade product called Me and the Bees Lemonade. It's a recipe for lemonade she has that she added in local Texas honey.
Oh, nice.
And she sold it to Whole Foods.
Oh, wow.
So she got a distribution agreement with Whole Foods, and she got an investment from the ABC series Shark Tank. You can do a lot of entrepreneurial things. There's a boy from outside of Boston who has spent the last 3 years installing and tending beehives. He's launched 13 hives, and his goal, he says, is just to save as many bees as he can and to get publicity and help others do the same thing. Yeah. There's a museum in San Jose, California called the Children's Discovery Museum that's creating almost 4,000 square feet of bee habitat where kids and their families can observe the lives of honeybees, etc. But I think, this doesn't lead directly to saving honeybees, but I think for kids to watch and learn about hives, it teaches them a lot about things like teamwork and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, there's no prima donnas here. Every bee has a job to do, and even the queen, despite her name, she has a miserable life. She has to lay approximately almost 2,000 eggs every day. She never gets to leave the hive. And when she can no longer produce those eggs, she's kicked out. She's surrounded by her, quote, daughters, the worker bees, and she's suffocated to death and then kicked out of the hive. So, this is, queen is, when you say someone's a queen bee, you're actually not, it's not a really positive term.
Right.
And then the bees themselves, they take care of the babies, they clean the hive, they fan the queen. So, I think you might say that maybe there's too much efficiency in the beehives because there's not a whole lot of sentimental feeling going on. But just to see how a social structure can operate in such a productive and orderly way, I think the only other two types of insects that have this kind of social system are ants and termites. I think if you looked at them, they also have these
hive structure.
Structures. And then, just kids will learn a lesson, which is that they can have an impact on their environment at an early age. They don't have to wait, till they're adults. And then if you're really interested in helping out, of course, you can always work with different lobbying groups who are trying to do a better job of taking care of the bees.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I shared earlier, I started gardening when I was 14 in the mid-'70s. And, from that, I've taken away how important it is to really get our young ones to understand food, where food comes from. So,
yeah, right.
I do think that you're planting seeds for an impactful, bright future with the with the young people. It's really important.
Yeah. Yes.
Really important. So, is there a role that our government can play in this process of protecting the bees? We have.
Well, as I say, the EPA is onto this, although probably not as fast as the most critical bee people are. Now, the White House last year established a task force to study bees and to look into colony collapse disorder. There's always good and bad things about government task forces.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's supposed to be presenting a report pretty soon. Germany and France, I mentioned two European countries, they've already banned some pesticides implicated in the death of bees.
Yeah.
And last year, a U.S. appeals court, there was a ruling that said the Environmental Protection Agency mistakenly allowed an insecticide onto the market and that it hadn't been proven to be not harmful.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's been taken off the market for a while. And I think they've actually ruled against another one of the companies.
Yeah.
The other problem is Brexit, which, as we all know, refers to Britain's decision to leave the European Union.
Right.
So in that case, Britain has banned some pesticides, which the beekeepers have favored. This an action the beekeepers favored. But now, if they leave the European Union, does that mean they have to negotiate these regulations with 28 different countries instead of having this one umbrella organization, which they have with the EU? So there's all kinds of ramifications. And then, of course, there's the EpiPen. I don't know if scandals may be too strong a word, but
I'd call it that.
Companies, they're 400% markup of its current version.
Yeah.
Of a product that is crucial to people's lives. It's not like you're buying an extra pair of jeans.
Right.
People really need these EpiPens. So bees are just in the news a lot.
Yeah.
Which is good. I'm actually going to Cuba at the end of this month.
Wow, really?
And I'm going to visit a bee colony that's just outside Trinidad. So, bees, they're in every country.
Yeah.
Except they're all over the world. I mean, and that means there's a huge honey industry all over the world. China produces a huge amount of honey. Vietnam produces a huge amount of honey.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story about a honey called Manuka Honey, which is produced. Have you heard about that?
I have.
It's produced in New Zealand, and it's supposed to actually have medicinal value. It's used in wound care, for example, and pressure sore care, which means that it's very popular and very expensive. And the Manuka honey producers in New Zealand are trying to trademark this product because it's so valuable.
Wow.
Now, the Manuka honey producers in Australia are not very happy about that.
Yeah.
And they're trying to prevent that. So honey is even, made it into the international headlines as being a controversial, litigious product.
Right. Wow. So what are you specifically doing to educate the public about honeybees?
Well, I am publishing blogs on things like how we can teach our kids the importance of bee culture. I've published one on tips to take care of bees and not annoy your neighbors.
Oh, yeah, that would be a good one.
Yeah. I've just basically given advice for people who are thinking about being beekeepers. I've got, of course, the book, which I hope alerts people to the problem. I mean, one newspaper columnist said that bees are the canary in the coal mine. I mean, they're the ones who are alerting us to the fact that we are really in danger of destroying a part of our environment that once it's gone, it's going to be very hard to get back.
Yeah.
So I think I'm also doing programs. I'm going to do actually my first program in a school next week in a class where I have a PowerPoint presentation on bees and colony collapse disorder, and hope to get the kids interested in this. So I don't, I'm not a biologist. I'm not an entomologist. I don't have any, I was a history major, as you pointed out. I have no science background, but I really care about bees.
Yeah.
So, my goal is just to get information out there. Hope it makes a difference.
So when we started talking, and you made some comment about you're not a beekeeper, and you're not a gardener, but you're a researcher.
Right.
You're a researcher, and you've done all of this great work around collecting data that we all need to know about bees.
Right.
And so I just, as we were kind of chatting over the past 30 minutes or so, it's like, wow, I need to acknowledge her for that. You have done a great job of
thank you.
Of putting together a story that is of, in my opinion, of great importance moving forward in our culture. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. No, I mean, I was surprised. I'm surprised myself at how. So, I mean, it's probably an exaggeration to say that I love honeybees, but when I saw those bees coming out of that shoebox and marching single file into their new home, ready to go to work, I just thought, these are amazing creatures. And that's when I really started to do a lot of research. And I am a researcher, and I like collecting facts. Yeah. And I like to write. So,
bonus.
Yeah. So it all kind of came together, but...
You started to say you thought about a second book?
Well, I was starting to say I thought about a second book, but I mean, honestly, in terms of a species or a specific topic like honeybees, nothing that I have found so far interests me enough in this kind of focused way. I mean, I have other major interests. Yeah. But I nothing has jumped out at me and hooked me like these bees.
Yeah. So bees coming out of the box one by one in a single file line, that's something to learn from observing bees. Is there anything else to learn?
Well, I've observed the Waggle Dance they do, which is this 8-step, you've probably heard of this 8-step dance that honeybees will perform for the bees in the hive. So once the honeybee goes out and gets the nectar, she comes back to the hive and she does this Waggle Dance, and that it by doing that dance, she pinpoints where what direction the flowers are and how far.
Interesting.
And, scientists are still not totally sure how this is done.
Right.
But somehow they do it, and it's fascinating. And then they also have this maneuver called clustering at night or in the cold weather, where they all gather around the queen bee to keep her warm, and they take turns clustering around, and then they move out, and the next ring of bees goes in and clusters and generates warmth, and then they move out. So they're just these very, very efficient systems. They don't waste anything. They don't waste any movement.
Right.
It's just, it's genetic. It's in their genes how to act like this. And, it's too bad we can't harness some of that dedication. But it's really great to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for all of that. That's just amazing.
Oh, good. You're welcome.
So what do you consider your biggest success?
I think my biggest success was making the decision to leave my job as a business journalist, which I had done for most of my life, and write a fiction novel, because my whole training had been in fact-checking everything, fact-checking people's names, titles, quotes, facts about the company you're writing about, or the industry, or the latest development in that industry. And all of a sudden I had this surge of ecstasy when I could realize I could make a lot of stuff up. I could make up the kids' quotes. I could make up their names. I could make up the plot. And I think it did take a leap of faith on my part to make that, to think I could make that transition, because I'd written co-authored a business book on leadership, but I had never tried anything like this. And I had no publisher. I had no advance. I had no promise of anything.
Yeah.
And I just kept at it until I finally decided to send something off to a publisher. And luckily, the first one I sent it to took it.
Oh, bonus.
It's this Tumble Home Learning.
Yeah.
In Boston.
That's great.
Because I knew they specialized in environmental fiction, and I thought, wow, that's what my book is.
Right.
So that was great, and they've been really good to work with. So
one of the things that I really target and touch on in my podcast is talking with people that were doing something that wasn't them following their heart, and then they transition to following their heart and doing what they love in the world. So what happened that moment occurred where you decided to, go away from what you'd been doing to writing this book? Was there a spark? Was there something that happened?
Well, I think it was probably one contributor was that essay I mentioned to you in the Wall Street Journal. And that the journal has a system where they forward to you any comments on your story, on your article. And I got lots and lots of comments on the article, but they broke down into two types of comments. One was saying how, honeybees are the greatest, and thanks so much for all this, and don't you love them? And the other was saying, this is a beautifully written essay. So we hope you keep writing, or I hope you keep writing. And so I thought, whoa, that's nice. So I had some support. I had people who were liking the topic and also liking my writing. I mean, I knew I could write because I've been a writer for so long, but I never knew if I could write fiction. And in fact, I was working with a woman for a while on the first part of the book, and she was very critical. And I finally just said, I'm done with her. If I really believe in this project, I have to go ahead with it.
Yeah.
So I put it aside for a month because it was a little discouraging, and then I just picked it up and I said, I'm going to do this. And I just thought it was good. I mean, I'm a pretty critical editor of myself as well as others, and I just thought, I think this can work, and I'm going to keep going. So I did.
Nice. You followed your heart.
Yeah. I did.
Good for
I did.
you.
I loved writing it. I loved getting up in the morning and writing.
Well, and you've gone to continuing to teach about this as well. So, yay for you.
Thank you.
What drives you?
I think I get a lot of satisfaction, almost kind of sensual satisfaction of seeing my words in print.
Oh, yes.
So whenever I had a story published in whatever newspaper or magazine I was working for, I got a kick out of seeing my name,
Right.
seeing the article. I don't have a particularly long attention span, so I think a lot of reporters actually are like me, and they go from one topic to another. They sort of fill up the glass with a lot of facts, and they pour out the glass into the article they're writing, and then they forget part of it and
Right.
move on. So I got kind of used at an early age to seeing my name in print or an article that I'd worked on as an editor.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's that visual satisfaction of seeing something that I've actually produced, on paper, as opposed to in some intellectual, ethosphere somewhere.
Cool. So, is there a book that has been influential for you in this process?
I think I could say that there's some good middle grade books I read. I can give you a few titles. There's one called Hoot by Carl Hyacin, who's actually a writer of he's a quite famous lives in Florida, and is a columnist and writes a lot of adult books, fiction books, but he also wrote a middle grade kids book called Hoot, and it was just hysterical, and it was very well done, and it in fact is an environmental fiction book. So I read that, and I thought, wow, this is terrific. I'd love to be able to write a book like that.
Yeah.
And then I read a very unusual book called The Westing Game. I could never write a book like that, but it showed me that there are no limits to one's imagination when you come up with plot and characters. And then the book that I read to my two sons that it's kind of embarrassing to say this, but I still go up to one of my son's rooms. He's now 26.
Uh-huh.
And I read the ending of the book over because it's so amazing. The book is called Bud Not Buddy, and it's about a African-American orphan in the Depression whose mother dies, and he sets off on his own. He's about 10 years old to find his father.
Wow.
And it's just so beautifully written and such a great plot.
Uh-huh.
So I actually had an email from a girl who had read Bees on the Roof and said she was going to do a school project on it, and could I recommend books, middle grade books? So of course I recommended the obvious, Charlotte's Web, books like that. But then I mentioned these three, and she has just started reading Bud Not Buddy. She sent me an email and said, "I loved it, thank you."
Wow.
So
Fantastic.
Those were probably all influential. I mean,
Yeah.
my book's very straightforward. It's got a straightforward plot,
Yeah.
It's nothing like Charlotte's Web or The Westing Game, but
It makes an impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, Robbie, what final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, I mean, there's this very trite, piece of advice people say, like follow your heart and take risks. I'm not a risk taker, so I can't say that, with a lot of oomph behind it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I started this book actually when I was still working full time, just very briefly. I mean, very happy, every now and again thinking about it, doing the research. So I had already, I had a full-time job. I was confident that I could have stayed in that job. So when I finally left to do the book full-time, I kind of had a good handle on where I was going with it. And I had the support of my family. That's a big factor.
Big time.
So, I think, but I do think it's something you have to say to yourself, what makes you forget the time, what time it is, or whether it's mealtime, or, I mean, I can sit and write and I don't look up, because I like doing it. And is there something, my brother, the backyard beekeeper, is an architect, and he can spend hours, drawings on drawings.
Yeah.
And I just think you have to find that passion, that kind of keeps everything at bay, keeps all the bad stuff in the world that's going on, keeps it at bay for a while, so you can get involved and get, and feel good,
right?
Feel good about yourself and think that you have a talent and that you're working on it and that something good will come from it.
Yeah. Heidi and I here at the Urban Farm call it farm time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we go out in the backyard and 3 hours later look up and it's like, oh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think gardeners are like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
Well, it's been wonderful. I love your questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners get a hold of you, find the book, so on and so on?
Well, the book is on Amazon under Bees on the Roof. It's
Okay.
also available from the publisher, which is Tumble Home Learning, THL.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a website that's beesontheRoof.com.
Oh, perfect.
So any of those ways, I'm reachable.
Fantastic. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/bees on the roof. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
Thanks, Greg. Bye-bye.
My favorite plant to grow in my yard is the fruit tree, because you plant it once and you get fruit for decades. If you have ever been curious on the best ways to be successful in growing fruit trees, today is your lucky day. Why? Because my team and I have compiled our best interviews and videos in one place to assist you in growing your own toe-tingling peaches and awesome apples right out your front or back door. Plus, as an added bonus, we've included an in-depth guide to successfully growing fruit trees in your yard. To get access to this information, it's free, by the way. Just go to urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444. That's urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.